endlessly searching for an original sin.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sweet Pool. Things are really getting weird, aren't they? Tetsuo's mother must have been ecstatic to finally meet someone from her son's class, because she remained chatty long after dinner had ended. Mostly she'd asked about school, claiming Tetsuo never told her anything. It was clear from her tone that this was merely the reluctance of a young man asked to share his life with his mother, and not the aloof silence he exhibited at school. At home, Tetsuo was perfectly normal. But then, what was that lonely vibe he felt? As he pondered this, he changed into his pajamas and fed the fish. His mind was so distracted he nearly gave them too much. He'd been fidgety ever since he got home. Maybe it was the nerves? Dinner had been perfectly pleasant, but that hadn't mitigated the anxiety of being in Tetsuo's house. On top of that, he failed to accomplish his original goal. He hadn't managed to ask Tetsuo a single question. Annoyed with himself, Yuji left his room and headed for the kitchen. There in the sink was what looked like a black withered chunk of tree bark. It was a dead flesh lump. It died. He thought he'd dispose of them, but apparently he'd missed one. Sensing a memory of the weekend's horrors looming in the back of his mind, he quickly averted his gaze. Next to the sink, the plastic container was sitting upside down, in the dish container clean and dry. Something about the stew tonight had reminded him of the container's former contents. If it was truly the same stew, however, that would mean Tetsuo brought it to him. He struggled to imagine Tetsuo doing something like that for anyone, much less him. He thought back to dinner time, and Erika's face floated through his mind. They had used to share meals together, just like Tetsuo and his mother. All at once, he was overcome with wistful nostalgia and a hint of envy toward Tetsuo. Still, that was a side of him Yuji could never have seen at school. Strangely enough, he'd seemed more human at home. A lot more human than Yuji himself, anyway. He was starting to forget what being with a family ever felt like. He could admit it. He was jealous, plain and simple. And yet, he hadn't stopped thinking about the loneliness he sensed at the dinner table, though it was clearly none of his business. He recalled the look on Tetsuo's face as he ate. Somehow, the Tetsuo in his mind looked sadder than the real thing. The next morning was uneventful. Yuji's condition had stabilized, so he headed off to school. Perhaps a proper meal had done his body some good. It was warm and sunny outside, unusually pleasant for this time of year. His book bag was slung over his shoulder, the plastic container inside. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Instead, he decided to find out if it really was Tetsuo's. As he walked into the classroom, his gaze went to the windows. Tetsuo's desk was still vacant. Near the blackboard, Makoto was talking with a friend. He glanced over at Yuji, but only for a moment. As Yuji got ready for the first period, he overheard a nearby group of students chatting.
なんかさ、昨日の喧嘩のやつ、白沼は厳重注意で済んだらしいぜ。
そうなん？じゃあ今日は普通に出てくんのかな？
多分ね。まあ今まで問題起こしたこともないし、成績も優秀だしで多めに見られたっぽいよ。ほら、学年でも一二を争うくらい頭いいからさ。よくわかんねえけど、進学率とかに問題出るんじゃねえの？
ああ、なるほどね。それにしても白沼ってあの外見で。
Then the door slid open and the classroom went dead silent. It was Tetsuo. He glanced around the room, then nonchalantly walked in. Once he took his seat, the classroom quickly defrosted, and the usual chatter resumed. Yuji sighed to himself and leaned back in his chair. The students who were previously gossiping about Tetsuo had now changed the subject. He shot a quick glance at Tetsuo's direction. His force field had felt much thinner at his house, but now it was back in full effect. This was the usual robotic Tetsuo. But now that Yuji had seen a more human side of him, his mannequin impression was all the more unsettling. The more he learned about Tetsuo, the less he understood. Which version was the real him? As his mind wandered, the usual hymn began to play over the loudspeaker, and Yuji rose to his feet for morning prayer. At lunch, Yuji waited until Tetsuo had left his seat, then took the plastic container out of his book bag and left the room. Cutting through the courtyard, he entered the old building and headed up the stairs to the roof. He had a hunch, one that had persisted ever since he had walked out of the classroom. Pushing open the door to the roof, Yuji stepped out onto the concrete. The bright sunshine made him squint. Through the glare, he could make out a figure sitting next to the safety fence. Sure enough, it was Tetsuo. Yuji stopped just outside the doorway. He'd been right, and the knowledge gave him a bit of a rush, before doubt crept in and he debated turning back. But then he remembered the plastic container he was carrying. For now, the first step was to find out if it was Tetsuo's. Steeling himself, Yuji slowly walked forward. Like last time, Tetsuo was eating a yakisoba sub and watching the scenery. Sensing Yuji's approach, he turned his head. Their eyes met, and Yuji suppressed the urge to flinch. Recently, he started to understand why he found Tetsuo so intimidating. Whenever Tetsuo looked at you, he always looked directly into your eyes. And it wasn't like he was trying to feel you out or gauge your reaction. He just stared straight at you and never looked away. There's a character in Maniac that does that. Good movie. It always felt like Tetsuo could see right through him. And he had a feeling that this was part of the reason why everyone else was so uncomfortable around him too. Unsure of what to do, Yuji stood next to Tetsuo, keeping a bit of a distance between them.
これ
Yuji held it out for Tetsuo to see.
お前のじゃないよな。
The moment he asked the question, he instantly regretted it. What if he was wrong? He was ready to bolt. Tetsuo stared at Yuji for a moment, then opened his mouth to speak.
そうだけど。
So, Tetsuo really did bring him stew that day? Yuji felt like he understood the man even less now.
なんで俺のところに。
Tetsuo didn't respond. Instead, he took another bite of his sandwich. Yuji waited for a moment, but evidently Tetsuo had no intention of answering. The silence was exceedingly awkward. The light breeze ruffled his hair, and he could smell a hint of chlorine from the pool next to the building. He couldn't just keep standing there reluctantly. He lowered himself beside Tetsuo. For some reason, being around Tetsuo wasn't as stressful as it used to be. Was it because they'd had dinner together? He glanced in Tetsuo's direction. Which was the real Tetsuo? This one, or the one he'd met yesterday? Could both be real? What about the Tetsuo who'd violated him in the rain, or the one who'd come by to deliver his worksheets? It was impossible to keep up. If only he could be sure that Tetsuo hated him. At least then he could respond in kind instead. Suddenly, Tetsuo turned his head, and Yuji found himself staring into his eyes. His heart leapt. He quickly turned away.
どういうつもりなんだよ。なんかいろいろ。
Yuji mumbled, staring down at the ground. As usual, Tetsuo didn't respond. This time, however, the silence pushed Yuji to continue.
お前のことよくわからない。何回か見てるんだよな。俺がそのなのになんで？もしかしたら変な病気かもしれないのに気持ち悪くないのかよ。
As he spoke, his eyes wandered over to the cracks in the concrete.
それにお前のことホモなのかと思ったけど、そうだったとしてもこんな気味悪いやつは相手にしないよな。
I don't know, they're bug chasers. As inhuman as me.
俺はお前のことが怖い。何をされるかわからないし、何を考えてるのかもわからないから。だから
Unsure how to finish, Yuji fell silent. The air between them felt so awkward he couldn't think of anything to say. Maybe Tetsuo was fed up with him? He had humiliated himself in front of Tetsuo so many times now. Perhaps all this flailing for meaning was just making it worse. In that case, maybe it was best to cut their ties for good. With that thought, he moved to get up. All of a sudden, something appeared before his eyes. It was a sub sandwich covered in cling wrap. A yakisoba egg sub, to be precise, the Academy's most popular menu item, and one that often sold out within the first 10 minutes of lunch break. Did Tetsuo buy it for him? No way. He couldn't picture Tetsuo doing that. And yet, the sandwich was right there. Could he possibly accept such a generous gift? Wait, what was he thinking? Yuji thrust his empty container into Tetsuo's hand and stood up, ignoring the sandwich. Then he turned and headed for the door. For some reason, he felt utterly humiliated. And a little angry. Were these feelings directed at Tetsuo or at himself? Either way, being around Tetsuo always seemed to throw him for a loop. Driven by emotions he couldn't describe, Yuji fled downstairs. By the time he made it back to the classroom, lunch break was nearly over. Yuji returned to his desk and went to take out his textbook for 5th period. Just then he sensed someone's presence and looked up to find Tetsuo standing there. Was Tetsuo angry with him? Now that he thought about it, his actions certainly warranted it. After all, he'd stormed off without even acknowledging Tetsuo's offer. As Yuji steeled himself for a fight, Tetsuo set something down on his desk. A very familiar-looking wallet.
俺の
階段に落ちてた。
Yuji realized that he must have dropped it on his way back. He usually kept it in his back pocket, so it must have slipped out while he was running. And now Tetsuo had returned it to him. He only needed to say 2 words. Thank you. And yet, he couldn't do it. Part of it was stubbornness, but mostly it was shame. He was furious with himself for acting like a child when Tetsuo was always so calm and mature. He hung his head in silence for a moment, then felt something cold touch his neck. Yuji looked up in surprise. It was Tetsuo's hand. Instantly, memories flashed through his head. The toilet stall, the encounter in the rain. He jerked away, shooting Tetsuo a suspicious glare.
なんだよ。
また滲んでた。
何が滲んで。
Putting 2 and 2 together, Yuji put a hand to his neck. When he pulled it away, his palm was stained with a bit of red fluid. How long had it been there? Had anyone else seen it? Tetsuo could see it, at least. This proved that it wasn't a hallucination. Still, how could Tetsuo bring himself to do that? Just to touch someone's blood like it was no big deal. Didn't it disgust him at all? As Yuji watched Tetsuo slowly curl his hand into a fist, it was like he was cradling the fingers that had touched Yuji's neck. The sight was captivating. Yuji felt his face grow hot. An ache blossomed deep in his gut. A low breath escaped his lips, and then...
離れろよ。
A challenger has appeared. A cold voice broke the spell, and Makoto stepped in front of Yuji like a shield.
幼児、嫌がってるだろ。どけよ。
Makoto fixed Tetsuo with a vicious glare.
迷惑なんだよ。いきなり付きまとってきてわけわかんねえし。幼児が嫌がってるの分かってんだよな。
おい。
どけよ。金輪際、幼児に近づくな。
Other students were shooting concerned looks their way. Yuji had no idea what was happening. Should he say something? What? Okay, so we have two choices here, which means we hit the magical save button if it lets us. No, not you. So I think last time we had a choice, we picked blue. I'm curious to see what either of these choices do. So let's check blue again.
誠、い
Okay.
いんだ。
Alright, so we have that. Now I am curious, very curious in fact. Do we say the same thing or do we let him... Do we let Makoto be a bit of a hero?
もういい。や、
Oh, I don't want to be a dick to Makoto. No. Will not be dick to Makoto. Makoto, good boy. For now. We haven't seen Makoto go full creep mode.
誠、いいんだ。
Yuji spoke in a calm voice, hoping to allay Makoto's anger. To allay. He had a feeling Makoto was about to explode if he didn't do something.
俺は大丈夫だから。
なんでだよ。
Makoto turned his glare on Yuji. An uncanny light blazed in his eyes.
幼児、なんでこいつのことなんかかばうんだよ。そんなに大事かよ、こいつが。
何言ってるんだよ。落ち着け。
うるさい！なんでこんな奴のこと。俺だってな。
With a desperate cry, Makoto threw himself at Tetsuo. Seizing Tetsuo by the collar, he raised his fist high. A girl screamed and the classroom exploded.
誠、やめろ。
Yuji jumped up and grabbed Makoto's shoulder, trying to pull him away from Tetsuo. Meanwhile, Tetsuo continued to stare at Makoto with the same stony expression.
うるさい！うるさい！うるさい！うるさい！
As he screamed, the bell rang and the classroom door slid open.
お前ら騒がしいぞ。って何やってる？
Just then, Kamiya walked in. He took one look at the scene and ran over.
見た。やめないか。
うるさい！離せよ！離せ！
Kamiya then proceeded to drag Makoto out of the classroom and down the hall. Fifth period started a little late that day, but Yuji couldn't concentrate at all. What in the world had gotten into Makoto? It was all he could think about, and before he knew it, class had ended. After school, Yuji stayed behind in the classroom per Kamiya's request. Kamiya wanted to discuss what had happened at lunch. He'd already spoken to Makoto and Tetsuo individually. Soon it would be Yuji's turn. A few other students were in the room, chatting loudly. Yuji sighed and glanced out the window. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon. As he watched the sunset, he overheard a nearby conversation.
つうかさ、 昨日は3年殴ったばっかだってのにさ、今日は誠だぜ。白沼ってやっぱやばいんじゃないの？
でも今日のはなんか三田くんも変じゃなかった？あんな風に怒鳴ったりとか初めて見たんだけど。
あん時って確かさ。
The conversation trailed off abruptly, and an awkward silence followed. Puzzled, Yuji looked over to find a group of students all staring at him. A chill ran up his spine.
なあ、崎山ってさ、白沼と仲いいの？
The other students leaned in, curiosity playing on their faces.
今日も昼になんか喋ってただろ？前にも保健室連れてったりとかさ。
崎山くんと白沼くんが仲いいとか結構意外なんだけど。
昨日とか白沼が3年殴ったってやつ、あれなんでだか知ってる？
All at once, a barrage of questions descended upon him. He knew they didn't actually care what had happened. They just wanted to see how Yuji would react. To them, he was nothing more than a source of entertainment. They watched him with childlike innocence, hoping for a dramatic response. Yuji was unimpressed. He stared back at them silently. They began to look uncomfortable. Maybe he wasn't doing so well at hiding his anger. As the awkward silence dragged on, Yuji decided it was time to leave. But just then, the door opened and Tetsuo walked in. The group of students quickly moved away.
次、科学室。
Yuji grabbed his book bag and left the classroom. There was no sign of Makoto. Maybe he'd gone straight home. Yuji continued to think about Makoto all the way to the chemistry lab. When he arrived, he found Kamiya sitting on a lab table.
崎山、お前まで呼び出して悪いな。最近はよく話してる気がするけども。とりあえず座ってくれ。
Kamiya indicated the table across from his, and Yuji did as instructed.
白沼や三田と話して大体のことは分かった。崎山は巻き込まれただけだよな。特に何かしたわけでもなかったと。
We just stood there, kind of dumbfounded.
はい。
白沼と三田もそう言ってたな。
二人は、
白沼は例によってあまり話してくれなかったが、三田は膨れっ面でごめんなさいって言ってきたよ。まあ、若いうちの喧嘩は勉強みたいなもんさ。殴り合って学べるのって今のうちだけだと思うんだけどね。こんなこと言ったら他の先生方や PTA に怒られるから内緒だけど。
I like the teacher. Kamiya smiled mischievously and held his finger to his lips.
さてと、崎山にはその確認をしたかっただけだからもう帰ってもいいんだけど、そうだな。一つちょっとした話をしようか。
The teacher kind of looks like a character from Sayuki. The one with glasses, and I'm blanking on his name. Crap, and I love that anime. If anyone remembers, let me know in the comments. He thought... Oh, let me know your favorite anime, too. He thought for a moment while adjusting his spectacles, then sat up straight once more.
とあるかわいそうな生物の話だ。崎山はミルメコレオンって知ってるか？
いえ。
Myrmecilian? The word had a mysterious ring to it.
上半身がライオンで下半身がアリの姿をした怪物のことだ。一説にはライオンの精子が誤ってアリの卵にかかったなんて言われたりもしてる。
I need to know how that one happened.
まあ見た目からして悲しいんだけども、ライオンとアリ、この二つがくっついて最も困ること。それは
Yuji simply shook his head. He didn't have a clue. Kamiya shot him a weary smile.
ギブアップ早いよ。答えはね、食事だよ。ライオンは肉食でしょ？でね、かつてアリは草食だと考えられていたらしい。ライオンは肉を欲しがるが、 アリの性質がそれを受け付けない。アリは草を食べたがるが、ライオンの性質がそれを受け付けずと。つまり何も食べられないってことだね。ミルメコレオンは生まれたらすぐに餓死するんだって。これじゃ何のために生まれたのかわからないよな。
It was certainly a tragic tale, but it was also completely out of left field. What was he getting at?
本当にそんな生き物が？
いや、空想上の話だけどね。
The man smiled impishly and folded his arms.
なんだったかな。ヘブライ語訳の聖書をギリシャ語に翻訳するときに間違えたとか、そんな話だったよ。悲しいアリ獅子の誕生秘話。
Antlion. Well, I mean, there are such things as antlions.
はあ。
Where was Camilla going with this?
でも思うんだけどね。ライオンかアリ、どちらかが一方を殺せば生き延びる道はあるんじゃないかってね。
Sir, you're doing the glasses thing. You're evil, aren't you?
共存できないなら乗っ取るしかない。ミルメコレオンは幻だけど、そういった競争社会は意外と近くにあるものだよね。
He laughed, but the absence of mirth in his tone gave Yuji a pause. His eyes were hard, his smile cold. Yuji, get in the robot. Yuji barely recognized him.
なんてね、ちょっと堅苦しい話題だったかな。いや、教職っていうのもなかなかストレスがたまるんだよ。
As quickly as it came, the chill passed, and Camilla broke out into a broad smile.
そういや、昨日白沼のところにプリントをちゃんと届けてくれたんだってな。すまなかったな。
いえ。
他に崎山に話すことは。ああ、そうだ、思い出した。
He clapped his hands together, and a smirk slowly crept up onto his face.
崎山、俺はね、すべての生徒に平等な愛情を注ぎたいと思っているんだ。
はあ。
Where did that come from? Blinking, he waited for Camilla to continue.
だから崎山にも俺なりの愛を伝えていきたいと思う。はっきり聞くが、ちゃんと授業についてきてるか？
Unable to deny it, Yuji fell silent. His poor health was largely to blame, but regardless, he was definitely behind.
仕方がない。病み上がりだってこともあるしね。けどこのままだと試験に響くだろう。俺が教えてやりたいのは山々なんだが、そうもいかない。だから。
He paused to adjust his glasses with his middle finger. His silver frames caught the light of the fluorescent bulbs above them.
白沼に頼んでおいた。あいつはうちのクラスでは一番だしな。特に理数系は学年でも常にトップ3入りだ。
トップ 3？
Come to think of it, Yuji recalled hearing something to that effect. So what did Camilla ask him exactly? Oh no.
遅れを取り戻すためにもしっかり教えてもらうように。白沼との友情を深めるいい機会にもなるしな。
You fool! Camilla grinned obnoxiously as Yuji stared at him in shock.
それはつまり
白沼に勉強を教えてもらうようにということだ。
That was putting it lightly. Maybe Camilla thought he was doing him a favor, but Yuji would have preferred him run it past him first.
あまりそういうことには慣れてないから。
いや、まあ本当のところはね、白沼ってこの間も3年と喧嘩騒ぎになっただろう。だからこれは最近の素行に対する罰ってことで、崎山に勉強を教えろって言ったんだよ。罰ゲームに崎山を利用したみたいでなんだか申し訳ないんだけど、でもこれも一つのコミュニケーションだと思えばいい。 白沼と少し頑張ってみてくれないか。ね。
わかり
Reluctantly,
ました。
Yuji nodded. To tell the truth, the idea didn't bother him that much. At least not enough to fight it. Which was not to say that he was enthusiastic about it either. It was complicated. The way things always got whenever Tetsuo was involved.
もし何かあったらいつでも相談してくれ。
はい。失礼します。
Yuji hopped down off the table and left the chemistry lab. As he walked, he felt anxiety swell in his chest. Tetsuo was going to tutor him? He couldn't picture it at all. Was Kamiya serious about this? Feeling miserable, Yuji climbed the stairs and headed to the shoe locker. And that's where we're gonna leave it. So guys, it looks like we have tutoring time with Tetsuo next time. Thank you guys so much for joining me. And what do you think Makoto's real problem is? Alright guys, once again, thank you for all of your support. See you all next time. Bye. So hi everybody, just a quick little advertisement to show you guys all the new awesome stuff in the shop. If you guys love the guinea pigs, we have the Box of Mystery shirt featuring Rambo, Mage, and Kisa, bringing you guys lots of good luck in their very special box. But if you want somebody who's not so lucky, you can bring home the Guinea Gunt. Don't worry guys, he won't make you all into a Ralph fail. He promises to shake his pills only to bring you all good luck. And if you guys want to bring the guinea pigs on your laptops and stuff, we also have these cute little stickers right now as a limited edition item. You can even get Sir Harvey and a cute little heart sticker with Kisa. We also have, in fact, speaking of, a lovely mug if you need some coffee of Suka with Yogg-Sothoth. That's right, bring the Eldritch Abomination home with you. We also have Sir Harvey as a nice little hoodie for when it starts getting colder. You gotta have something to keep you warm like Harvey and his lucky shirt. We even have Freddy Doxson here. Miko's here to bring you good dreams, or maybe nightmares if you don't pick up her hoodie. So what's it gonna be? And if you guys still want to pick up our comic, it's still available digitally through the shop. So you can pick up the first issue and enjoy chaotic stories while we work hard on the second and third issue for you guys. And now, back to our awesome show.
Tonight.